Hello, this is Josh Bycer from GameWisdom.com. Welcome to today's Critical Thought. First, a little bit of some updates. Thank you to 652 subscribers here on YouTube. We finally got over the 650 mark, and now we're on our way to 700. For those of you who are interested in the Patreon campaign, I have updated things with new early bird discounts. So a discount on the majority of the rewards available. If you're interested in supporting Game Wisdom and would like to get our rewards at a little slightly reduced price, be sure to check that out now. Link should be below. And if you have any suggestions for new rewards or things to add, I'm always listening. But let's get to our topic today. And while there is not a post available, it's still a really good topic I want to talk about. And that is uniqueness versus refinement when it comes to reviewing or analyzing games. In any entertainment medium, we see projects of all kinds. We see those that are experimental or never before seen, and we see some that are the umpteenth or who knows how many iterations of that version. And the same can be said of video games. And there's always a debate to be had as to whether or not uniqueness essentially deserves its own qualitative purpose or its own metric when it comes to looking at a game. A lot of sites that consider themselves, high thinking, tend to value uniqueness very highly compared to refinement. But there is something to be said about a game that is polished and done very well. And we can say this especially when we look at the indie versus AAA design philosophies. Independent games, by their nature, are very much on the uniqueness. These are games built explicitly because no one else is making them. And there are hundreds, if not thousands, of examples of games like this. Stardew Valley, for instance, was created because the developer wanted more of those kinds of farming simulator games, and there weren't any on the PC. Likewise, games like The Binding of Isaac, Renowned Explorers, The Swapper, Don't Starve, and so many more games would never have been made in a AAA studio. Just imagine for a second Undertale, developed by EA Games. I'll give you a second to recover from that horror. But what we get in uniqueness, we also lose in terms of refinement. Many independent games usually come with bugs. Maybe the UI isn't as streamlined or as accessible as it could be. Graphically, you're very rarely going to find an indie game that's going to stand graphic engine-wise next to games like Tomb Raider, BioShock, Gears of War, and so on. Now, on the flip side of this, we have refinement. These are games that are built in terms of iterations or sequels or inspired by other genres, and they typically come from the AAA market. In this case, we're not seeing a game that is 100% original, unique, never before seen. Instead, we're seeing someone essentially elevate a genre or mechanics to a level that we never thought were possible, or in such a way that it's greater than previous examples. A good example of this would be Doom from this year. Doom does have unique elements to it in its terms of progression and exploration on that kind, but it's very much a first-person shooter from the mid-90s, early thousands. Does that make it a bad game? No. But it is very much a polished version of those kinds of games. And there's another big example of that I want to talk about in a few minutes. Getting to our titles, I have two very different RPGs here. Let me see if I can get this. We have Legend of Legacy over here, and Etrian Odyssey 2 Untold over here. Both of these games are from the RPG genre, and yet they both couldn't be further apart. Legend of Legacy uses a lot of unique systems in terms of how progression works, how the world is explored, and so on. Etrian Odyssey, on the other hand, is a straight-up dungeon crawler inspired by wizardry and other first-person RPGs back in the day. Now, another example that I couldn't find the box for in time for this video would be The World Ends With You, which is an entirely original RPG. Now, with these two games, Edge of Honesty is very much a refinement. There's not a lot of completely brand new elements in this game. But what it does well, it does extremely well. While The Legend of Legacy is completely different. You're not going to find an RPG much like this game on the market. Is it perfect? No. There are some issues I had with balance and progression. But a lot of that comes from the fact that this is one of one. There is no game that this one was built on. And that's where we run into this challenge in terms of refinement versus uniqueness. And it's a very tricky thing when it comes to reviewing games. Do you give a game that is 100% original but has problems a higher grade than one that we've seen before but is just really damn good? And in the AAA market, refinement is a huge deal. A lot of the best games ever made were sequels to something else. Assassin's Creed, Mario, Zelda, Metroid, Castlevania, Call of Duty, Doom, World of Warcraft. Need I go on? I could go on for probably another 20 minutes. But the point is that in the AAA space, it's about taking an idea and saying, here's what it is, now what can we do more with it? How can we take it further? And the absolute smoking gun example of this is Blizzard. Blizzard is one of the most highly regarded studios in the game industry. They have made waves both on console and PC. They are one of the most beloved developers out there, and their games are also some of the most highly rated. But with that said, they are not really an original studio. And I know with that said, there may be some Blizzard fans ready to attack me, but hear me out. Blizzard is a master at refinement and analyzing game design. Their best games have all been built on a previous genre or previous game. Diablo was built on the backs of RPGs, StarCraft strategy, World of Warcraft MMOs, CCG Hearthstone, MOBA, Heroes of the Storm, and of course, team-based multiplayer with Overwatch. None of those ideas came about because of Blizzard. Instead, what Blizzard excels at is basically looking at these games and these genres and saying, okay, this is what works, this is what doesn't. How can we take this even further? I don't even want to know how many hours the Blizzard developers spend looking at other MMOs and EverQuests when they were designing World of Warcraft. And that is their MO. They will look at a game in a genre to details that I can't even possibly fathom. And what that does, it gives them the ability to then essentially brand it themselves. The Blizzard brand is one of the best brands in the game industry, and it's because of that level of refinement. Yes, there are other CCGs out there besides Hearthstone and other MMOs like World of Warcraft, but you're not going to find a game that's just like World of Warcraft or just like Hearthstone. Those designs, mechanics, and elements to get you to play them, that's all Blizzard refinement and polishing at work. And it's afforded them the ability to brand themselves in such a way. Again, the same thing could be said of Nintendo. I know what I'm going to expect when I buy a new Mario platformer. I'm not going to be shocked that the princess gets kidnapped by Bowser, or I'm going to have to collect stars or coins. Instead, I know I'm going to get a very polished experience with great game design that I may have played a platformer before, but I haven't played a platformer like this. And that is the key point of what makes refinement so great. But on the flip side, we can, spout the love of uniqueness. There are so many indie games that I've played that I would have never seen otherwise if it weren't for these developers. I mean, one of my favorite games was the Talos Principle from Crow Team, who, yes, they are still considered an indie dev at this point. Renowned Explorers was my number one game of 2015. There are literally no other games like Renowned Explorers out on the market. And there may not even be another game like that from Abbey Games. They may decide to do something completely original after their next expansion. But that's the point of these independent games and these unique titles. Are they perfectly balanced, programmed, and bug-free? No. But the uniqueness and the fact that I'm never going to play something else like this again, or play something even similar to that, essentially counters those polish issues. So for me, I tend to look at games in both scales. I don't necessarily rate one or the other greater. But with that said, there is one other important topic. What happens if we go too far to either extreme? And this is where things can get troublesome for both sides of the spectrum, but for different reasons. For those of you who've watched the channel here or read my reviews on Game Wisdom, you know I play a lot of video games. With that said, there are still plenty more games that I have not talked about, especially from the independent market. And one of the things that I find is that there are cases where there are independent games that are too unique, where they are just unpolished messes. There's a great game here, but it could take me, I don't know, hours of digging through annoying factors or poor UIs or unpolished gameplay to get through. And quite frankly, I don't have that time. Like I said in my piece reviewing games, if I don't spend enough time on a game, I'm not going to look at it, because a poor review is worse than no review at all for some indie games. But for a lot of those independent titles, that uniqueness comes at the cost of creating a product that is accessible. That's something that is actually marketable outside of the hardcore niche. Developers such as Paradox Interactive have struggled with this in the past. They have made some of the best strategy games on the market, bar none. But for a new player, they are all but impossible to learn unless you're willing to dig through layers and layers of systems and UI. Are they great games? Yes. But unless you're willing to dig through it, and not a lot of people are, they're not going to be able to see that. But on the flip side, AAA games who are too refined and lack original elements can also suffer. We've seen shooters after shooter after shooter all try and emulate Call of Duty or Battlefield, and it ends with just a game that feels like every other game. What made BioShock such a breath of fresh air was that it was an entirely original premise and first-person combat. Even games like Bulletstorm or Clive Barker's The Undying. These are games that are first-person shooters, but they do something differently. But we see from time to time that when there's a popular genre, the AAA market will try and capitalize on that with clone after clone, or I should say, loosely inspired after loosely inspired. The MMO market being such an example. After World of Warcraft hit it big, everyone tried to be the next World of Warcraft. But the problem with that is if you're trying to be like someone else, if you're not original enough, they're simply going to go with the game they know. It's the same issue with the mobile market. For every big name game like Kim Kardashian's Hollywood, Clash of Clans, Farmville, etc., there are dozens, if not hundreds, of clones of those games. They may change the graphics slightly, or they may feature another main character or setting, but it's still the same game. And the question stands, if I sunk 50 to 100 hours into Clash of Clans, why should I play your game that's just like it? I think the answer is that I'm not. And that is the dark side of being too focused on refinement. We can even see this with sequels of games. One of the biggest challenges that we see in the AAA market is creating a game property that can sustain itself sequel after sequel after sequel. Many games are not built with this sequel mentality in mind. They're built to see if it works, and if it's popular enough, we'll expand things further. But very rarely will you see a developer say, I'm going to make a AAA game and it's going to be a 10-game series. In fact, when they announced that originally was Shenmue being a 4-game series, that was insane, and they only got to 2 up until now with a Kickstarter. When a game does work and you do elevate it, that then leaves the developer with the task to keep growing and going. And very few developers have managed to do that. With Mass Effect, for instance, BioWare could have very well have easily said, let's just make 10 Mass Effect games and just keep growing that plot and that narrative. But they knew from very early on that they wanted this to be a 3-game series, and kudos to BioWare for actually getting through it all. Whether or not you enjoy the ending or you disagree with what they did, it's still a major accomplishment that they were able to develop a 3-game series. Likewise, Uncharted with 4 games and sort of tying up the story with number 4. But, as we've seen, there are cases where things can get a little too bogged down. I know a lot of people have been turned off of Assassin's Creed and how it became sequel after sequel after sequel of generally the same thing with some differences. Maybe every other game had a unique element to it. But for the most part, what I do in one Assassin's Creed is going to be the same I'm going to do in the next one. Same goes for Grand Theft Auto, and even what we could say with Saints Row. Now, Saints Row did reinvent itself with Saints Row the Third, and then with the 4th game as well. But it's very risky to do that. Again, it all has to do with branding and how you market these games, but we are approaching 17 minutes, so we gotta wrap up this critical thought before it becomes an entire discussion. So, again, quality or refinement versus uniqueness, I tend to value both with their games. If a game is more unique, I tend to overlook, quality or refinement. If a game is very refined and just a really great example of it, I tend not to mark it down if it's, the umpteenth platformer or first-person shooter or etc. And I think that's a major part of being a good reviewer. It's not just one thing you have to look at. You need to take apart a game and look at all qualifying aspects. But again, how you qualify that, that's up to you. So to end this critical thought, I have one question then. What do you value more? A game that is refined to the point like a polished diamond, but it's something you've seen before? Or a game that is completely unique, you're never going to see anything like it, but it has bugs, the UI may not work, controls are a little finicky, stuff like that. So let me know in the comments below. Be sure to check out the Patreon for our new discounts, and I will see you all tomorrow with our next critical thought. Anyway, this is Josh Bycer once again, and I'll see you all then. Take care. Thanks for watching the video, everybody. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment, of course, share with your friends. It always helps out. Check out game-wisdom.com, where I examine the art and science of games. You can follow me on Twitch and Twitter under GW Bycer for the latest updates of new content. And be sure to check out our Patreon campaign. You can find us on Patreon under Game Wisdom if you would like to donate and help contribute to keeping Game Wisdom going. Your donations can not only give us the monthly funding we need to keep supporting ourselves, but if we can hit some goals, it will mean more great content for you, and there are some nifty little rewards there as well. Thanks again for watching this video, and be sure to tune into the next one real soon.